welcome to another episode of Bold and Beautiful. I'm so glad that you're here, that you've tuned in, that you've liked, you're subscribed, that you got that notification. And if you have not and you've gotten this as a share, then please go ahead and like and subscribe. Go to YouTube or all the major major podcast platforms. I've got a special guest here with me, and I'm so thankful, so grateful to have Dr. Katarina Rosenblatt, one of my very dear friends, but just so full of information, so full of wisdom, the experience and information that we need to know about human trafficking, especially in the 21st century. So I want to tell you a little bit about Kat before we get started. First of all, welcome, Kat.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So let me share a little bit of who you are, and then we can go from there. Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay, so Dr. Katarina Rosenblatt is an author, consultant, trainer, and public speaker. She's the executive director of There Is Hope for Me, Inc. Dr. Kat created a survivor-led nonprofit from survivors to survivors of human trafficking, providing peer mentoring and support. She has over 10 years experience empowering survivors of sex and labor trafficking and domestic violence. She's created survivor empowerment workshops and led support groups for adults and minor survivors of sex and labor trafficking. She's an international trainer and speaker. She's developed a human trafficking wheel and assessment tool identifying trafficking within schools. She's an educator, and she uses her platform to talk to children about human trafficking. She has created role plays and dynamic speaking, which has been very effective in Florida and in Texas. She's a peer specialist to schools in Texas. Dr. Kat has written 2 books on human trafficking. Her memoir is entitled Stolen, which is amazing, the true story of a sex trafficking survivor and trafficking in America. If you've not read Dr. Kat's book, Stolen, you've got to order it today. It is a must read.
Thank you.
The most undetected human rights violation of our time. And Dr. Kat holds a BA in management from Trinity International University and LLM in intercultural human rights law from St. Thomas Law School, a PhD in conflict analysis and resolution from Nova Southeastern University, and she's attended law school at Trinity Law in California, earning a certificate in international humanitarian law from the Rien Cassin Foundation in Strasbourg, France, and is currently enrolled in an LMHC master's degree program at Lamar University. I'm going to stop there for your bio, because I want to get into all the things that you've done, all the things that just encompasses, and what you're focusing on now. I'm so glad to even bring you on the show this month, as we are in the middle of Human Trafficking Awareness Month. January is that month, and so I'm so thankful to bring that to my audience. So welcome, Dr. Kat, better known as Kat to me, my dear friend.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Kia, and your listeners. And I'm just so thankful that you've decided to take up this important cause, especially during Human Trafficking Awareness Month, which January is. And so I just want to applaud you for that, because a lot of people try to shy away from the topic, and you're willing to take it head on. Not only head on, but you do talk about it and incorporate learning in an experiential way with your students as well. So I applaud you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and I appreciate the relationship we have. For those of you who don't know, I am on the board of There Is Hope for Me, Dr. Kat's organization, and we are just doing some exciting things. I've been a part of, and I haven't done very much yet, but I've been a part of just witnessing all the dynamic things that Kat has done in working with survivors of human trafficking, and in stopping quite a few opportunities for traffickers to, just really snatch our children. And so, that's really the greater component of There Is Hope for Me, is that, can we prevent it, and what's happening with that? I mean, there's so many things to talk about, Kat, but can you share just a little bit of your story and how the Lord really put it in your heart to say, you know what, this is my calling. This is something that I have to do. I can't run away from it. I can't hide from it. I've got to take up, I've got to take up the cause. I've got to take up the shield and my sword and say, I'm going to battle for some young people and, older ones as well.
Well, thank you, Kia. Absolutely. I'd like to share some new revelations that I feel like God has given me, you know, being in Texas now, I have the freedom to also explore some of my Jewish roots. And so growing up, growing, being born into a Jewish family, growing up in a Jewish community, there were no services for domestic violence victims. Now, things have not changed a whole lot in that area, unfortunately. There's a lot of domestic violence in every community, really. It's still a hidden crime.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, a lot of children from domestic violence homes become victims of human trafficking. The reason being, such as in my case, my mom fled the domestic violence to go to a hotel. And at this hotel is where I was recruited. Now, had my mom had some type of services available to her in the community, or felt like she could go to a safe person, perhaps that could have been avoided in my own life.
Right.
And so, just like you said, we go into schools, we talk to kids, but it's also got to start within the home, within the family, and parents talking to their own children about the dangers of human trafficking. So in my case, my mom would take 2 buses to work. She still worked for my dad, was very much financially dependent upon him.
Mhm.
And while she was working hard, I was being recruited. You know, it was the summertime in school. I was 13, and this blonde, blue-eyed girl approached me, who she looked like a model. I thought pretty. She was 19. She was everything I wanted to be, or so I thought. And she befriended me at the pool area. And pretty soon, Mary, which was her name, Mary would introduce me to a pimp. But first, she had to gain my trust. And that took about a month of her just constantly talking to me, telling me how valuable I was, how she could understand my pain of my abusive father because she experienced the same thing. And so that's what traffickers do. And as you mentioned, I'm an educator at heart. So I hope you don't mind if I take the opportunity
Please.
to educate while I'm sharing my story.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely.
I knew you would, because you're an educator too. And so I really think that it's important for kids to really test relationships before you trust someone. You know, trust is the most valuable thing you can give to anyone. And so when a child gives their trust to another friend, an older friend, you need to make sure that that person really has your best interest at heart. And you
Right.
need to test the friendship before you invite them into your life. And so how do you test someone is by asking them questions, getting to know them more, getting to know their family, where they're from. You know, if I would have asked more questions, I would have found out that Mary didn't have a family. Unfortunate for her, but
Right.
she was a trafficking victim herself, now become a recruiter at 19. And so she was sent to get other little kids like myself, younger kids, you know, who are in middle school or just going into middle school. And the average age of entry into trafficking is 13 in the US. So middle schoolers and high schoolers are being targeted, absolutely. And so not having that safe family to go and ask questions, you know, is this person safe? I trusted her, just
Right.
hook, line, and sinker. Everything she said, I really believe, because I really needed a friend. I really needed someone to talk to. I really needed someone to be there for me. And this person was not a trustworthy person. And I wouldn't find out until the day that she introduced me to her pimp, who told me I could call him daddy. Now, she had found this daddy hole exist in my heart. As I
Mhm.
mentioned, my dad was abusive, and she said she understood hers was too. So she introduced me to
Wow.
this man, and he said that I could call him daddy. He had 2 and 3-year-old little kids at the pool. And I thought, well, he looks like a normal dad. Just because my dad's crazy doesn't mean he's crazy, you
Right.
know? And
Well,
so you just put your guard down. When you see little kids, you
sure.
think, okay, it must be his you know, his family, so I'm safe. And then he asked me, are you hungry? I said, well, I'd like to get some chips. You know, coming from a single parent home, Jewish or not, we didn't have any money, because
Right.
single parent moms don't have a whole lot. Single parents, period, you know, are juggling a lot.
Mhm.
And so he gave me $1, and that's all it took. That was the hook. And unfortunately, a lot of kids are brought into trafficking just because they're hungry, just
Wow.
because they love just because they need a friend. And these are things that can be prevented. However, we are not doing enough in our society, aside from you or I and your listeners who are listening. There's not enough talk about it. There's not enough to intervene in the lives of vulnerable young people. And
Right.
so I took the dollar and he said, but one day you'll owe me. And he held on to the dollar, and I just remember feeling kind of scared. And that's the other thing I tell kids is always trust your instincts. If
Yes.
you feel like this person is dangerous and they're unsafe, then they're unsafe. I don't care what anyone says. You trust yourself.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
as a result, I knew something was wrong. And I asked Mary, I said, what does he mean by that? And she said, oh, don't worry. He's just playing around. She just tried to shrug it off. That should have been a red flag, but I didn't even know
You were
what red flag.
13.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So I had no clue.
Hmm.
And that began the false relationship. And eventually she would introduce me to a 65-year-old John there in the hotel another day. And she said, he wants to be a dad just to you. Again, using that daddy hole
Hmm.
constantly. They use whatever vulnerability you have, they constantly use it against you. And so they use that to lure me into playing a game. And she said, you're going to be the bride. I want you to dress up in a white dress. It was very similar, like the movie Sound of Freedom. And so I went and put a little white dress on, and I went to meet Mary in the stairwell. And we went to the hotel room, and there was a 65-year-old sex tourist ready to partake in his transaction. I remember he didn't have a shirt on. He had gray dress pants, and he invited us in his room. And I just felt kind of icky, kind of weird, and that stranger danger feeling.
Yes.
And so that's a real thing. And unfortunately, Mary had ulterior motives, and I heard the door lock behind me.
Hmm.
And that's when I knew I wasn't in Kansas anymore.
Right. Oh my goodness. How traumatizing that must have been. I can't even imagine. And now this was in the 80s.
That's right. When there was just the DARE campaign, say no to drugs
Right.
or stranger danger. I knew Mary. I mean, she lived in the hotel I was
Sure.
staying in. Why would she be dangerous? But they
Absolutely.
don't even do that campaign anymore, stranger danger.
No, no, they don't. And what's interesting, that it's only been really in the last, oh my goodness, the last decade that we really see awareness, human trafficking awareness just being broadcast. And I was floored, as I was getting more information about how prevalent it is in the United States. I mean, we used to always think, oh, well, that happens overseas, and I've definitely known about that for many years. A lot of, in a lot of countries, in villages and tribes and things, a lot of countries that happens, and it's sort of normal, if you can call that normal. But I never thought of it happening in the United States. But when I started seeing the statistics and the level and the rate, I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And which is probably why that it's not talked about as much, because people are, they're really focused on the money that it brings in and that economy, which is horrific. So how did you get out of that situation? What was the defining thing that said, you know what, I've got to get out of here? Did someone rescue you, or what was that like?
Well, I just remember Mary mixing some marijuana on a plate, and the John asking me to sit on the bed with him. And I said no. I was being polite, which I shouldn't have been, but I was taught to be polite. So I just sat on the floor and I just prayed. And honestly,
Wow.
I can't say I had a Homeland Security investigator come in or anyone from law enforcement come in. I had God. And you know
Right.
what? God is still there today to help anybody who calls on him. And he doesn't change careers or, retire. He
Yeah.
is steadfast, and he is still the same God yesterday, today, and forever that
Awesome.
was there in that hotel room with me when I was 13. And I thank him for giving me the opportunity to know him personally. I had received Jesus at a Billy Graham crusade right before this happened.
Wow.
And I had privilege of meeting Billy Graham's grandson last year, Boz Tavidian, and he and I mapped out when his grandfather was in Florida, and it was just after I turned 13. So this
Wow.
is what saved my life, you
That's
know?
incredible. God knew exactly what was going to come and how you were going to need to call on him, and for you to see that he is powerful, that he's faithful, that he does miracles, because that was, just unimaginable, something that no one could have ever predicted or planned, or, even had any forethought about.
Absolutely, Kia. And that's exactly what we try to do by bringing awareness, and having this opportunity to go speak before Congress next month and talk about the trafficking bills, that every school should be educating children on
Yeah,
the dangers and the warning signs of trafficking. I mean, you've got to give kids a running start. If they
absolutely.
don't know, how are they going to be able to avoid unhealthy relationships? And so that's why I'm so proud to be among those who are going to be presenting and sharing and speaking and talking about our experiences. Because now the statistics show, just from our outreach with There's Hope for Me, which you're a part of, unfortunately, 1 in 3 middle schoolers and 1 in 9 high schoolers are being recruited on a daily basis, and 30% are boys. And
Wow.
so that means nobody is immune.
Right.
Nobody is, and everybody deserves to hear about it. Don't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I was sharing those same statistics. In fact, I was thinking that it was middle school was 1 in 5, because I believe the last time that you were speaking at our school, I was a few years ago when I had you come and speak to our student body. And I believe that the statistic was 1 in 5 in middle school. So I'm floored when you're saying here 1 out of 3. On our campus alone, we have about 3,000 students between middle and high school. And so I was sharing those statistics with my high schoolers, and I said, look around you right now. It may not necessarily be in this room at this very moment, but if we were to open things up, the statistic doesn't, it doesn't lie. And there's probably some more that we don't even know, that we have no idea about. If we look at the microcosm of just our campus, who needs rescuing that no one knows about? And so that it's so imperative. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing to help prevent human trafficking, because if we can get it before it happens, and I know you've done a lot with survivors, which is incredible, because obviously we don't need to, we need to be able to help them, and not to have them be a target or continually being a target, but how do we prevent it? What's our best tool in education?
Absolutely. Is doing what you're doing. Every educator needs to know how to do that and needs to know about it. So everyone should do what you're doing, which is having the conversation with your students. Because even like we saw in the outreach that we did with your school, I think there were like 3 kids that came forward, right?
Yes. Yep.
That had experienced trafficking, and we were able to help them and talk to them, and in some cases talk to the school law enforcement or federal authorities, which you guys had a great law enforcement person. A lot of schools don't even have a law enforcement person, so I think
Wow.
you guys are ahead of the curve just by having that, somebody
Yes.
that was familiar. He already knew about what trafficking was, and I think that was very important. The other thing I would say is absolutely promoting these federal bills so that schools can't, call your legislators and let them know that you want the no trafficking zone bills passed in every school district. And then also, there's another phenomenon, which I'm not sure if you're aware of. There are some states, including Texas, that they still arrest minors. So we
Wow.
need to stop doing that. Florida, I was part of the Safe Harbor Committee, the ad hoc committee there in 2010 to 2013, and we got the Safe Harbor Act law passed so that minors were no longer arrested. Other states still, I think there's still 9 states around the country that still need to pass their safe harbor law to protect children from being arrested. Because if you're a minor, how are you consensually engaging in prostitution? You
Right.
can't even engage if consensual is consensually in sex.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
charged with a criminal act.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's unfortunate. And then we need to have more safe housing around the country
Yes.
for when these children are recovered so that law enforcement do have a safe place to place them and
Mhm.
they don't need to just put them in just a general group home or take them to a mental health facility, which sometimes they do need to because they
Right.
need to detox or what have you. But I would love to give more options and opportunities available to survivors and law enforcement so that they can have safe houses around the country where children are being treated with a therapeutic model
Yeah.
and they're not jailed or in a cage and they're not locked up,
My
because
goodness.
those are the kind of things that are re-traumatizing. So we need to have a trauma-informed policy on how to work with survivors um, across the board.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, do you feel like that is going to be better off government run, or we need to have some partnerships with nonprofits? I mean, how do we make that happen as a community?
I think that's a great question, Kia. Obviously, when going back to Florida, when uh, there were these juvenile jails, they were originally run by government agencies, but then they became privatized.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of corruption. Same thing with sober homes, sober living. A lot of corruption or misuse of funds
Right.
that became an issue. So it is an age-old question, if you privatize something, how do you vet organizations and make sure that they are utilizing the funds correctly and they're actually helping survivors?
Mhm.
Well, what I can say as a survivor leader, a national survivor leader, is having a survivor voice in every single one of those nonprofits that you partner with needs to be mandatory,
Wow.
because that is one thing that survivors will not be bought. Survivors will not give in to the pressures of corruption. Survivors, for as long as I've been around in this movement, it's been almost 20 years now, from being a student to now having my own nonprofit and being a voice for others, I can tell you that survivors really do look out for the best interest of survivors. And so I think that's why um, it's a federal practice now to ask for survivor leaders to be included in grant applications, but it should actually be a standard across the board for every nonprofit that does anti-trafficking work to have at least one survivor leader in a leadership role,
Wow.
not saying you're survivor led because you help survivors and you ask them questions. That's not
Right.
survivor led. That's maybe survivor informed, but survivor led is actually giving survivors a voice in your organization in a position of leadership so that they can say when, hey, this is not a good practice to
Right.
use or to have with other survivors. And I've seen that be a wonderful model for many different states, agencies, and organizations such
Wow,
as
that's
ours.
incredible. That's incredible because I mean it's logical. Because if our goal, community wide, nationally, federally, is to eradicate this and help our young people, help, even obviously it's not just kids, it's older men and women as well, just people who are vulnerable, but especially kids, then we need to get to the root, get to the problem, and attack it with the rigor that we need to, with the with a passion. And so we have so many organizations, and we've seen this in government and in, different nonprofits and organizations, that they kind of work around it. They do some good things, but really their bottom lines are heavy, with resources, and they're heavy financially, and they're not really doing and pursuing the cause, and fixing the problem that needs to be fixed. But this is too vital. These are our children, and I've been looked at the statistic lately, but I know that the numbers of missing minority children are extremely high. And who's going after them? And I would not be surprised if they're counted in those numbers of kids who've been trafficked, or even kids who've been, they've been sold on the black market, or even for organs, they're sold on that. There's a whole black market for organs. I mean, and I think that unless we can open up the conversation and get out with what you're doing, getting into the schools, going in front of Congress, working with Homeland Security, working with law enforcement to say, look, we've got a problem and it's going to take all of us to fix this problem, that we're going to see it's going to just increase, and I feel like, it's been a blessing with the movie Sound of Freedom, because more and more people are starting to be aware. Their eyes are opening and they're saying, oh my goodness, this is happening in our backyard. Oh yes, it has been happening in our backyard. So
Mhm.
where do we go? Where do we go from here? What's your focus right now in 2024?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, Kia. First, we need to collaborate. Collaboration is key. Collaborating with a survivor-led nonprofit,
Mhm.
survivor-informed is good, but survivor leadership is vital.
Right.
So building up survivor leaders, creating space and funding for survivor leaders and survivor-led organizations. And then, of course, bringing the information to kids in the schools, like we talked about, passing the bills that will educate every school.
Yes,
There's
I love
some
that.
talk, oh, well, people are worried that they're not going to teach it the right way, or they're going to, you know what? Just tell them. Just tell them,
Right.
because nobody told me. After the first trafficking experience, I was left for dead. And so, like you said, people can get the book stolen if they want to read the whole story. But for our purposes, I want to share the second trafficking. I was in my middle school. My mom had moved us out of the hotel. I was now in 7th grade, and it happened again. Why?
Mhm.
Because I had no counseling, I had no kind of services available to me. That is another thing. We need much more mental health counseling that
Right.
is trauma informed and survivor centered. And then in my middle school, the trafficker had sent his daughter to recruit other kids.
Mhm.
And so the peer to peer recruitment that happens within schools, as well as online through social media, is just enormous. I mean, we were talking about the statistics earlier. The amount now has probably doubled or tripled, because those statistics were done several years ago from our outreaches in South Florida. And now we've seen, even in schools in Texas, there's been cartel involvement, families who are
Wow.
in, the cartel, and their children are speaking up about it. So I think people need to realize that what happened at our borders enabled cartel to come in and exploit more children and vulnerable young people, just like we've talked about. So unfortunately, the epidemic of human trafficking is about to get worse.
Oh my goodness. And that's so heartbreaking. And it just clenches my heart, and really honestly just makes me angry. One of the things that our kids are talking about on my campus, our students who are working on this human trafficking awareness project, is how can they be a friend and a confidant, and just looking out for one another. And I think that's part of the story. And you and I have talked about this before, that if we can just help them have just besides being aware of the issue themselves, of human trafficking, and how it exists, but just looking out for one another and saying, look, we care about you. You're not alone. You are not, you're not by yourself. You don't have to be vulnerable. We will create a community so that you have a place to be. And I think that's so important.
Absolutely. And like you said, and I love what you're doing with your students, always, and I support you 110% with that. What you said was so important, because in my middle school, had I found a group of people, friends, or even one student that saw something shady with this recruiter and maybe intervened and said, hey, look, we'd love to be your friend, or we have a group and a safe space for you to talk to somebody, I would have been able to talk about the abuse going on in my home. I would have been able
Right.
to address some of the issues, instead of taking this girl's friendship, who was not really my friend. She pretended to be my friend, but there in my history class, she was a recruiter and I was her target.
Mhm.
And before I knew it, I went for a sleepover there. And instead of having pancakes and pool parties, her dad, who was the trafficker, brought over men, and they gave us cocaine and alcohol.
Oh
And
my God.
so at a young age, I was exposed to, 14, 15 years old, excuse me, exposed to doing drugs, exposed to drinking, exposed to an adult life, so much so that they wound up blindfolding us and kidnapping us and taking us to a brothel. Of course, they made it sound like we were going to do big girl things, we were going to be adults. But in essence, it is kidnapping because I didn't know where I was going. And I definitely didn't sign up for prostitution.
Wow. Absolutely
I
not.
did not sign up to get raped.
Oh my goodness.
No. And that was just the beginning. So I wound up getting involved with them for a longer period, got heavily addicted to drugs. I did escape. And that's where I get some criticism from people because no, I did not want to become a prostitute. I was indoctrinated into it, but I don't like that word. I consider it child abuse. I consider
Yeah,
it rape. I
absolutely.
was not voluntarily engaged in that.
Mhm. Wow.
And as a result, running away and fighting back, they came and found me. And nobody in this community would help me in this apartment building where the brothel was. Nobody helped me. I looked around, I was disheveled. I was a 14-year-old now at this time. And they were like, why aren't you in school? What's wrong with you? Because nobody had that awareness. And so that's why I appreciate that movie, Sound of Freedom, because it did bring awareness to our
Yes.
entire country, thank God, and even internationally. So much so, more than any one survivor voice or organization could. However, we still have work to do because even after that, there's still people who don't know. And so we have to make a way for people to know about it. And that's why I applaud you for, creating this podcast. And I just want to share the phone number so that if somebody does see something, they can report it. If you see something, please say something. The number is 888-3737-888. And that's the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-3737-888. And they do it like that so it's easy to remember. And you can report anonymously. If somebody would have had that number and reported when they saw me running away from the brothel, that would have helped me and I would have been able to get helped quicker. But
Absolutely.
nobody helped me. And so the traffickers found me, brought me back, intimidated me, sat me down in a chair in that story. Instead, I went back to school because I made a problem for them. I was not going to go quietly. I knew my mom was waiting for me.
Right.
And so they threatened me if I ever told anyone. I didn't tell. And so there was my dad picking us up and he was abusive. And I knew if I told him, my mom would get beat up. Or, if I told her, I mean, there was no win in telling what just happened, about the abuse I just experienced. So I stuffed it inside. I went back to school and they were there just recruiting other kids like nothing, because kids to them are a dime a dozen.
Right.
A dime a dozen. You're not special. You're not important. You're just one of them for them to use and to make money off of. And like I said, if unfortunately there was no services for domestic violence or for trafficking in the Jewish community or any community for that matter. So that's what I hope to do, is to build up awareness and then also build up programs for these communities, for people to go to before it happens. Or if it does happen, let's have a safe space so you don't have to become a victim again. Because like we've seen in my story, I had multiple experiences and it wasn't even just those two. Because there were no services, because there was no one to talk to, no one to help, it almost became normalized. Like I expected men to be abusive my entire life. I expected rape to be part of life. Even when I got married to an unhealthy marriage, I experienced rape in marriage for 20 years. And I never knew that that was not normal. I, honest to God, thought it was normal. I thought that's what men do, because that's all I ever knew.
That's all you knew. Wow. Okay.
And that's
So
why I haven't
that's
had
wild.
a boyfriend.
Right. Oh my goodness. So that's just, I'm, every time I hear your story, I'm blown away. I'm blown away. But what I'm most blown away by is God's grace and God's mercy and the power of healing. And so, the podcast is about being bold and beautiful. And I tell you, you wear it well. You have been just hearing your story and reading the book and hearing it again and knowing what you're doing. in the communities, you know, in Florida, you were in California, and now in Texas. Tell us just a little bit about how God changed you, how God healed you, and so that you could say, you know what, that's not me. That was never supposed to be me. I don't have to live in the in the gutter of trafficking because somebody placed that label on me, or all different labels on you, because you said there were no services, so people looked at you like it was your fault, but it wasn't your fault. So you had nothing to do with that, with what was happening
Right.
to you. So how did you
Right.
how did you mentally and spiritually and emotionally say, you know what, I'm done with that. I'm done with the effects of that lifestyle. And there's a, you know, it's time to fight, like the song that says you know, the eye of the tiger. We're ready to fight, you know. How did
Yeah,
that happen?
I appreciate your question so much. Um, so, so I think one of the, I think one of the things that, while you were saying that, you know, just that anointing that you have, Kia, I think just to ask the right questions just made me think about, um, the shame and low self-esteem that I felt as a child. And starting with that, because my father was a rageaholic, and he really, um, stole that from me, you know, or I should say the enemy stole that, you know, because I did not have that affirming love from a father figure. So I think now, having experienced such a wonderful, beautiful relationship with the Lord, you know, with God. I mean, in the Jewish community, we call him Hashem,
Mm,
and it's the same God, you know,
yes,
Adonai. He's still my loving father.
yes.
And seeing him now from that perspective has given me such an enormous amount of self-esteem, so that I realized I was never meant to be abused. I was never meant to be kidnapped. I was never meant to be raped. You know, many of our Jewish people are still being held captive as hostages, and it's wrong. And ever, you
Ever.
should never
Yeah.
be kidnapped. You should never be raped. No woman should have been ever experienced that in Gaza or here, you know. And I think especially as a child, so reclaiming my identity as a Jewish woman who loves God, I am realizing that I'm a daughter of Zion. I am a daughter of the Most High.
Yes.
And because of that, he has placed his fingerprint on me and loves me in such a way that I'm not sure any human being ever could, because it's
Oh,
just so
totally.
beautiful. I know. And I feel so, so privileged to have this relationship with my Heavenly Father. Um, I'm so grateful, because then he also allows me to see, you know, the pain that perhaps my father experienced that caused him to be that abusive man.
Right.
And I've been able to reconnect with a lot of Jewish people here, wonderful Jewish men, older men, you know, in the Orthodox community, that they have very strict policies about, you know, not even touching women, not shaking hands. And to be quite honest, I feel safe. I feel safe because I know that Hashem is with me, and I'm protected. They have these guardrails for a reason.
Right.
Now, with that said, um, I still find so much purpose in doing this work,
Right.
because I realize that there are still perpetrators out there who are exploiting vulnerable and innocent young people, young women, and children. And that just should not even be a thing. I can't wait until the next generation who does not tolerate this, but it has to start with us, because
Yeah.
what one generation tolerates, the next generation accepts and
Mm,
embraces. So we
right.
cannot tolerate any kidnapping, any abuse, any rape of any woman or child. Absolutely no human trafficking whatsoever,
Absolutely.
ever, ever
Absolutely.
again.
Ever, ever, ever. And I think that that is so powerful. So many things, that so many nuggets there. I know we're almost out of time here, but look, if you're listening, and please like and subscribe, share this podcast, make people aware of what's happening right now. Don't let it end with this, 30, 40-minute podcast. Go to thereishopeforme.org and, donate. This all costs money. We need resources to keep this going, to promote in schools. My students have designed this t-shirt that takes Dr. Kat's logo, and I'll put it up on the screen, but so that you can see what they're doing. And we're getting, we're promoting that. We're raising money for the organization so that we can save more and more kids, so that we can help prevent, so that kids are aware and we can prevent human trafficking, because and like you said, with this influx of our borders just being open, kids are ripe. It's a ripe time for people to just swoop in and to traffic these kids, and we can't allow it to happen. I don't care who you are, where you've come from, or where you're going. We've got to handle this, and we need everybody's help. If you're listening right now and your heart is touched with this, you've got to play your part, play a role, let people know. Support this organization, thereishopeforme.org. And it wasn't necessarily supposed to be a promotional, but look, it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and we want to take full advantage of getting the word out as much as possible. We don't want to forget about it, because these kids are not forgotten. God didn't forget you, Kat, and he's not going to forget the kids and the young people, the women, and the boys who are being trafficked right now. He has not forgotten you. Look, if you know somebody you're listening and you know someone that the situation may be a little sketchy and you're not sure, please have them contact the Human Trafficking Hotline, and contact us. Leave in the comments. We would be glad to help. We want to partner. Man, Kat, I'm so impressed with you, Kat, that you are all over the nation. You're in California, you're in Florida. South Florida is the pit, if you will, of a hotbed of trafficking. Just because there's access. Okay, there's access and people aren't thinking about it. You don't walk down the street thinking, oh, someone's probably going to kidnap me today. No one thinks that, right? But man, you're in San Antonio, you're in Texas, you're even dealing with labor trafficking down there. And God, I know it has you in all different, you were at the UN, partnering with them and in with our congressmen and women in DC. So there are awesome things in store. And I'm excited to see where God is taking the organization, where God is taking you, and there is hope for me. Is there anything else that you'd want to share, that you want people to know about what we need to do and how we need to respond?
Amen. And I just want to say thank you, Kia, and glory to God, glory to Hashem, because God's children are not for sale. And if this has happened to you, just know that you do not deserve to be abused or exploited. Nobody does. And there is hope for you too. If there was hope for me, there's hope for you. There's hope for anybody. Thank you so much, Kia, for partnering with us. Thank you for being on our board. Thank you for what you do with the kids in schools and being an educator and supporting your own husband's nonprofit and ministry, and just all the work you do all over the globe as well. I'm honored to partner with you as well, my friend, and call you my friend.
Yes, thank you. I love you so much, and I'm with you. I'm praying for you, praying for what There's Hope for Me means to so many people, to survivors and their families, and what it's going to continue to mean. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your story. Guys, look, if you've not gotten Kat's book, if you haven't looked up the website yet, you're driving and you're listening to this podcast, man, as soon as you stop, look up thereishopeforme.org, order your copy of the book so you can get the whole story, so you can see what Kat is doing. Go to the website, give, and be a part of the victory, be a part of the story, be a part of being bold and beautiful. I'm so thankful for you, Kat. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you next time.